The SS Sphinx cut through the Nile like a dark jewel gliding under the fading Egyptian sun, passengers leaning over the rails, unaware that the river held secrets far older than their tourist maps. Before we dive into today's topic, make sure to subscribe to the channel to stay updated with all our latest videos. Don't forget to like and comment your thoughts below. I love hearing from you. The SS Sphinx cut through the Nile like a dark jewel gliding under the fading Egyptian sun. Passengers leaning over the railings felt the warm wind on their faces and listened to the soft lapping of water against the hull, yet even as laughter and clinking glasses echoed from the deck below, an undercurrent of unease settled over the ship that no one could name. The air smelled of the river and of distant desert sand, and somewhere in the chatter of excited tourists there was a whisper of something ancient waiting to be noticed. The protagonist stepped onto the deck for the first time, carrying a small satchel filled with notebooks and a camera. Every corner of the ship gleamed with polished brass and rich wood, while the windows framed a river that seemed endless. The other passengers moved past in pairs and small groups, some photographing the receding city skyline, others leaning toward guides who spoke in low voices about temples and legends in the fading light. He tried to smile and appear calm, but there was a shiver running up his spine that had nothing to do with the cool evening breeze. Dinner was served in a long dining hall with floor-to-ceiling windows offering a view of the Nile like a liquid mirror reflecting the fiery sunset. Some guests spoke in soft tones about the next day's excursions, while others sipped wine and nodded politely at strangers. It was then that the local guide mentioned the rumor, a half-remembered story about a hidden artifact lost along the river long ago, a tale dismissed by most as the kind of legend tourists should photograph but never question. Yet the protagonist felt the words curl around his mind the way smoke winds around a candle. Later that night he wandered the deck alone under a sky thick with stars and watched the shoreline slip silently past. The temple ruins seemed to rise out of the dark waters themselves, and shadows stretched long across columns carved with images of gods whose names he only half remembered. A sudden movement caught his eye, a figure slipping among the trees along the riverbank, and when he blinked it was gone. The unease in his chest hardened into something heavier, something that whispered he was not the only one who had noticed. In the following days the ship moved steadily along the Nile, each stop offering both beauty and mystery. Luxor's Karnak temple rose like a fortress of sand-colored stone, and in the twisting corridors he discovered a small carving that did not match the rest of the hieroglyphs, a sequence of symbols that seemed to form a map. Yet no guide mentioned it. During quiet moments in his cabin he found a folded piece of paper tucked under the mattress, a note written in a hand that was not his own, cryptic enough to suggest a warning rather than a greeting. He tucked it into his notebook and returned to the deck where the sun burned gold across the water. Among the passengers tension began to rise like a tide. No one admitted to noticing, yet it threaded through conversations and glances and unexplained disagreements. A historian spoke too loudly about the importance of finding treasures hidden in plain sight. A woman who had seemed carefree became withdrawn and wary of every shadow, and the protagonist could not shake the feeling that something followed them on the ship at night. Every corridor smelled of polished wood and perfume, yet every creak of the floorboards seemed louder than it should have been. One night the sound came, a scream muffled by the hum of engines echoing from the lower decks. The protagonist ran toward it, adrenaline sharpening his senses, the air thick with fear and incense. A door swung open and a shadow slipped through, and when he reached the spot, no one was there, only a journal left open on the floor with a drawing of the river and a mark where the ship had been anchored. He traced the mark with his finger, the same mark he had seen carved into stone at the Temple of Philae. The blood pumping in his temples faster than the river moved beneath him. The mystery had moved from rumor into reality, and he was caught in it. As the ship turned toward Aswan, the nights grew darker and the shadows longer. The protagonist could feel them breathing just beyond his sight, and the river itself seemed to whisper warnings in a language he could not understand. Yet every morning the sun rose, and tourists boarded small boats laughing and photographing the temples, and he felt a cold isolation watching them, unaware of what lurked beneath the golden sands and the endless water. This Sphinx glided on, oblivious, carrying secrets, older than any passenger, and each night brought the certainty that the next revelation would not be gentle, and then it happened a figure climbed aboard in the dead of night, a presence more real than rumor, more than a ghost. The scream came again, and this time the protagonist found a clue carved into the floorboards. The same symbols he had seen in temples and on notes on the deck. He tucked it into his satchel and felt the weight of a secret that stretched back centuries, a secret that now demanded pursuit. The Nile whispered, and the ship glided steadily as though it were a part of the mystery itself, and he knew that when the sun rose, the journey would take him farther than he had imagined. The sun rose over the Nile like molten gold spilling across water and sand, yet the warmth did nothing to ease the cold knot of dread twisting in the protagonist's chest. He moved along the deck with quiet determination, the cryptic symbols etched into his notebook, a constant weight at his side. Every ripple in the river seemed magnified, as though the water itself whispered secrets meant only for him. The passengers carried on with laughter and cameras, oblivious to the tension that had settled over the ship, as though the Nile had chosen him to see what others could not. At the first stop, he lingered near the edge of the dock, watching shadows stretch across ancient stones. The ruins of temples rose like sentinels guarding the past, and his eyes were drawn to a small alcove half hidden behind crumbling pillars. Something had been left there, a mark carved deep into the stone. The same symbols he had seen in his journal, the note, the floorboards, and now the riverbank itself. At night he began to gather others quietly, a historian with sharp eyes, a woman who had been wary of shadows, and a young guide who had quietly mentioned feeling eyes on them. While the ship moved through the night, they pored over sketches and photographs connecting symbols to hidden chambers long forgotten. They whispered theories as the engines hummed beneath them, the Sphinx rocking like a cradle, carrying them toward revelation or disaster. The shadow that had haunted the ship seemed to grow bolder as they approached Aswan. On the deck, the wind tugged at his coat, and the Nile stretched endless and dark. The figure appeared again briefly, a silhouette against the lanterns of the ship's upper deck, then vanished, leaving only a ripple in the water. The protagonist clenched his jaw and turned toward the companions, who now shared his fear and determination. They had no choice but to follow the trail. They moved at night through narrow corridors and abandoned docks, their footsteps muffled by the hum of the river. A small boat waited near the shore, and under cover of darkness they slipped into it, gliding past reeds and low-hanging branches. The shadows seemed alive, the wind carrying whispers from the river, the same whispers he had heard since boarding the Sphinx. The map of symbols guided them, and finally they arrived at a temple entrance half swallowed by sand and ivy inside. The stone walls were carved with intricate patterns that pulsed in the lantern light. Some symbols glowed faintly, as if recognizing the presence of the intruders. Their breaths echoed through the halls as they followed the markings deeper into chambers where the air was thick and ancient. The protagonist's hand trembled as he traced the carvings, feeling the pulse of centuries in the grooves of stone. Then a sound froze them all, a low scraping that grew louder, a shadow moving just beyond the lantern light. The antagonist stepped into the chamber, a man who had smiled politely at dinner and vanished too easily from the crowd, now revealed with greed in his eyes and a dagger in hand. His voice was a hiss echoing off stone walls, demanding the artifact, the secret of the Nile. He lunged, and the protagonist barely dodged the strike. The historian tackled the man into a pile of rubble, and the lantern swung, spilling light across carvings that seemed to shimmer with approval or warning. The struggle carried through winding corridors along subterranean waterways, the river itself lapping at the walls as though urging them toward or away from the heart of the secret. Finally they reached a chamber vast and hidden from the sun. An altar rose from the floor, and atop it rested a golden object carved in the likeness of a god long forgotten. The artifact radiated a heat that was not of the earth, a power that seemed to demand respect and awe. The antagonist lunged one final time, but stumbled on the uneven stones and fell into the water below the chamber, the current swallowing him, and the cry echoing into darkness. The protagonist and the companions approached the altar, their breaths heavy, their hands shaking. They did not touch the artifact, but documented it quickly, the camera capturing symbols and light too intricate to memorize in a glance. They left the chamber with reverence, the Nile whispering behind them the way it had throughout their journey, as if acknowledging that its secret had been seen but not stolen.